anthropology, nutritional anthropology, the study of what we've eaten throughout different societies, through different generations, different communities around the world. It's an interesting topic, and later on I'm going to be joined by Eric. Now, Eric is a nutritional anthropologist and has lots and lots of experience in this particular area, and I find it fascinating. My dad turned 80 yesterday, and even talking to my dad about, how in their society food was different, as he was growing up just post-war to today, and it's fascinating. And when I knew that we'd got Eric on today, I went around my favourite, I'm going to say this just in case they try to see me, but I went around my favourite food shop, Marks and Spencer's. I love you, Marks and Spencer's, normally. But I went around yesterday to look at labelling on foods. Of course, social distancing, and I didn't take up too much time. I picked a quiet time. And I was shocked and horrified by two products in particular. And they were packs of sweets aimed at children. And one of them said clearly, as if like it was some massive health benefit, contains fruit juices. And yet they were the most sugar-laden nonsense that I've ever seen. And honestly, you wouldn't feed it to your cat or your dog once you understand the damage that sugar does to us. So I was appalled yesterday at Marks & Spencer. We'll show those photographs a little bit later on. But welcome to the show. My name's Steve Bennett, your host. The show today has been produced by my son over there on camera 3. Hello, son. How are we doing this morning?
Tired, but all good.
Have we connected with Eric yet?
We have.
Oh, fantastic. He's connecting with Eric, which is good news. And also, don't forget, we need to put food on the table of people across the UK. Your support for Just Giving has been fantastic. So thank you very much to everybody that has made donations to Just Giving. And if you haven't yet, simply go to Just Giving, type in Primal Living. We're over £20,000 so far. And every time you make a small donation or a large donation, it is putting meals on the table of people across the UK that just at the moment, because of these hard times we find ourselves in, can't do it for themselves, and especially families at the moment where children were getting school meals, parents having to sort of pay for the meals now at home. So some just simply can't do it in these hard times. So if you can make a donation, that'd be great. And also don't forget to donate into the boxes, the collection points within your supermarkets. And the great thing when you do that, it is your local community that will benefit. It'll be people and households in your community that when you drop off the food will have meals on their table this evening. So again, massive thank you for support, but we need to keep it going. Now, we had Eric on a couple of weeks ago. We had so much great feedback, and also today we expect the same. So any questions you've got, feel free to ask away on YouTube or wherever you're watching this feed today. It promises to be absolutely fantastic. Eric, a very good early morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Really good to be back. It is a bit of an early morning, but it's worth it.
Was it 5 o'clock there, is it?
It is 5:03, bright and early.
Good stuff. How are you giving, other than talking to us, what you're starting your day off with? Coffee, water, what's your... Get
Water.
Me up in the water. Good.
Water. I don't use drugs to wake up.
I am. I'm using ginger and lime this morning.
That's a perfectly reasonable wake up. But no, I have no judgment if people occasionally want to use coffee. But I actually gave up caffeine when I was 18. It was ruining my life.
Right. Let's jump straight back in. There will be lots that watched last time. There'll be lots that didn't watch last time. Talk about nutritional anthropology, how you got into it, set the scene of how we're screwing up our children and everybody's lives with the food that we're eating today. Over to you. And I know it's 5 o'clock in the morning, but just give it to us loud and clear, that message.
Maybe I'll say it a little differently than we talked about it last time. I'll think of it like this. Imagine that you suddenly got a pet and you got like a pet cheetah. Would you need to go out and read all kinds of cheetah nutrition science reports? Would you need a cheetah nutrition guideline from the government? Would you need the cheetah food manufacturers organizations to educate you as to how to, feed the cheetah? Or would you just write Channel 4's just watch the Channel 4's Big Cat Diaries and then know how to feed your cheetah? In other words, you'd go out and look at the way the cheetahs were living in the wild, and then you would do the best you can to duplicate that existence for them, and they'd probably be relatively healthy. And I say that because that's exactly what happened to captive elephants when they first put them in zoos and circuses. 6 or 7 or 10 years max lifespan. When they found out in the 1880s or so that elephants could live 70 years, they decided to apply this thinking. They started looking at elephants in the wild, and they figured out, well, wait a second now. Over here, we're feeding them hay and treating them one way. Over there in nature, they're eating grass and fresh fruit. They're walking a certain number of miles every day. When they duplicated that lifestyle, suddenly the elephants could live even longer than they did in the wild because they weren't facing the same stresses in the wild. So, rather than say 60 or 70 years, they were living 70 or 80 years. That to me is a clue as to how we resolve some of the issues around what we should be doing.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. And I mean, I've got 7 kids and I love them all, and equally, because you can't have favorites. But my 12-year-old daughter 2 days ago, we just finished having dinner and there was some salmon left over. So the dog looked hungry, so I gave it the dog, and my little daughter was distraught. She was like, Daddy, you have to feed it. It's proper food. I went, darling, that is its proper food, not the stuff that we feed it when we've got no scraps. It's just like, it's all so messed up. And talk about life expectancy. I don't know if you know this, but here in the UK, of course you do, you've been here quite a lot. In a male, our age, a male 100 years ago in 1870 would have had a longer life expectancy then, than today. Now, nobody believes that figure, because they look at the actual figures and actually it suggests slightly shorter, but that's only because more people died in infancy. But if you looked at an adult male living over 150 years ago, his life expectancy was better than ours because they had a surplus of real food.
Yeah, and if they made it past 13 years old, then they would live longer than we would. But of course, because of infant mortality and all that kind of stuff, it slants the numbers, and numbers can lie.
But that's your thing about the elephants, isn't it? That actually they lived longer when they gave them the right food, but then had that extra protection of, so we've got this extra protection here. We've got something called the NHS, which is absolutely brilliant. We've got things to cure lots of different things, but we're living shorter than we did 100 years ago. Has to be food, doesn't it?
Well, there's no question. Food is playing a major role. We looking at the numbers in the United States, you can very easily see that in the 1970s, there was almost nobody in America under 40 with type 2 diabetes. And they called it adult onset because it wasn't an available condition for children. And of course, now in America, you've got 20 million young people that are pre-diabetic or diabetic and on medication. That's a big change in 40 years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's frightening, and those guidelines didn't come in until the 70s, did they? And the same in the UK. The average adult, the year I was born, was 2.5 stone lighter than the average adult today in kgs. I think it's about like 16 kgs or something. It's just frightening. So take us back then a little bit. So that's a great way of starting the show, talking about taking animals out of the wild. What would you feed them with your pet cheetah? Well then, I've got children now. So, but there is no program anymore to show me what I should be feeding my children, because we've long forgotten what to feed them. And the only influence, because I could go and watch the program about cheetahs, because that's just filming cheetahs as they would live. I suppose your answer could be, jump on a plane with you, jump on a plane with me, and let's go and spend time with the Maasai maybe, or go and spend time with the hunters that you spend a lot of time with. But maybe not everybody can do that. So maybe we explain how they're feeding children in these remote areas.
Well, I mean, the first thing is, I would say you absolutely wouldn't want to go and study what the Maasai are eating and follow what they do, because they're eating cornmeal and wheatmeal, and their culture has been completely destroyed because of that. So what we really want to do, I think, is do the best we can to look at our archaeological or anthropological history. That's where the real lessons are going to be. And yes, we can go and look at, like, say, really like the hunter-gatherer types, like the Hadza, or like the Kung Bushmen in Namibia. they probably give us a better view of what our ancestral history kind of looked like. I don't think we can over romanticize it and say, well, that's exactly what it looked like. But I think that's a lot closer, for example, than the way the average people are living anywhere else in the world. And we can look, as I said, at our archaeological history. You know, one of the caves that my grandfather excavated on the southern coast of the country, you know, they dug down into the cave floor, and you know, because when people live in caves, they litter. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this last time, but you can walk down into the cave where they've put glass walls up, and you can see 200,000 years of human litter and see precisely what it is that humans are eating. I mean, it's not a question. The only reason there's a question as to what to eat is because there's a question about who wants to make how much profit selling which thing. We know what our evolutionary history has been. We know what the human diet is. We just you know, allow a profit-driven food manufacturing system to, you know, manipulate that.
Yeah, when we say we know, but then there's people come along and try and confuse us all the time by saying, no, that wasn't what it was. So where's this cave? And tell us a bit more about that, because that's really interesting.
You know, there's a series of these caves all along the southern coast of South Africa. But I had a really weird situation once where my mother and a girlfriend of mine and I were at a beach in southern Africa. And this is before I knew about my, you know, grandfather's work, my great-grandfather's work. And I was heading back to the car. We were all heading back to the car, and I suddenly realized I'd forgotten my sandals on the beach. So I run back and I get my sandals. And as I'm heading back to the car, knowing that my mom and my girlfriend are probably pretty close to the car by now, there's this path going up the hillside, and I feel this compulsion to go up the path. And I'm not an inconsiderate person, so I'm like, I don't know why I can't not run up this hill, but I run up as fast as I can because I don't want to make them wait. And I get to the top of the hill, and there's a cave up there. And it's not even all that special a cave. I've been in much better ones before and since, but you know, it was just an outcropping and a cave that went in about 12 or 15 feet, and that's it. But there was a plaque on the wall that discussed those caves and discussed the excavations that had been done there. And it turns out that people had been living in those caves consistently for about 200,000 years, which kind of puts the pyramids in perspective, right? Like, this is a long time. And then on the plaque, it made this comment that the caves have been excavated by this guy, T.F. Dreyer, or whatever. I don't know. But that night, we happened to be having dinner at my grandmother's house. And my grandmother was my maternal grandmother, so she has my last name. But I felt like maybe her maternal last name was Dreyer. I thought maybe. I didn't know for sure. And so I asked her, do you know this guy, T.F. Dreyer? And she just giggles. It's her dad. So it's my great-grandfather that excavated these caves. So naturally, I made the assumption that maybe what drove me to run up this hill was some kind of childhood memory or something. And my mom assured me I had never been to that beach in my life ever. And so I have no idea what compelled me to go up that cave. But after that, I went and checked out many of the caves along the coast. And the one that I'm speaking about that has the glass walls on it is on the peninsula of Rawberg near Plettenberg Bay on the Garden Route. And that cave is a much more extensive cave and goes much deeper in. And you can see the eating patterns. In fact, you can even see where they, you know, obviously they were eating a lot of shellfish. And then all of a sudden, they stopped eating shellfish. It's like somebody published a book that said, don't eat shellfish. But that's not what happened. What happened was that for a time, because of an advanced glaciation, the water was sucked up into the ice fields and pulled away from the coastlines. And of course, there was no shellfish. But you can see that. You can see that during that time, they weren't eating shellfish. And so I'm with you. I think that we are, as a population, confused about what to eat, but that's because there are special interests that are driving us. I'll give you a perfectly good example, and I'm sure you're familiar with the case, but there may be some things I can shed a little more light on about it, and that is that in the 1950s, there was very clear evidence that we're talking now about sugar causing heart disease through a number of different mechanisms. And the Sugar Research Foundation, I think they were called, didn't like this inconvenient truth. And they went and hired 2 Harvard researchers. I think we might have talked about this last time. And they hired 2 Harvard researchers, and they commissioned I have to use air quotes, study. They commissioned a study that would frame fat. You know, fat's causing the heart disease, man. It's not the sugar. You got to look the other way. But there's this phenomenal moment in this research. There's this phenomenal acknowledgement by the sugar industry where the company was called the Sugar Research Foundation, which of course is a euphemism for sugar lobbyist. And one of the employees of the Sugar Research Foundation gave a speech at the American Society for Sugar Beets annual meeting. And he says this, I'll read the direct quote initially here, but he says, leading nutritionists are pointing out to the chemical connection between Americans' high-fat diet and the formation of cholesterol, which partly plugs our arteries and capillaries, restricting our blood flow and causing heart disease and blood pressure issues. Okay, hold on a second now. The leading nutritionists that he's talking about here are the nutritionists that he hired. Okay, like so this, what he's saying here is a deeply manipulative thing. And what he continues to say is that because if you put the average middle-aged man on a lower fat diet, it just takes 5 days for the blood cholesterol to get down to where it should be. If the carbohydrate industry were to recapture this 20% of the calories in the US diet, the difference between the 40% which people eat now and the 20% that they were recommending, if sugar maintained its present share and captured that difference in the fat share, it would mean a massive boost in profitability. Like, they commissioned the study, got the data they wanted, then went to their own convention and talked about the phenomenal market opportunity there was going to be to replace fat with sugar. This is one of the most devastating things to happen to food manufacturing and food regulation and the medical industry in human history. And it was bought and paid for by the sugar manufacturers.
It's just frightening, isn't it? I found an advert from the States in the 70s. I can't remember word for word what the headline, but it went along the lines, they were like in some sort of defense mode. They went along the lines of, if sugar is bad for you, why don't you see any fat children? That was in the 70s, right? So it hadn't completely got hold by then.
No, and the amount of sugar we ate back then was so, I mean, you and I, we remember the 70s. We're old enough. Like, we did eat sugar, but not like today. Oh my God. You know, the average American, I can't speak for Britain, but I suggest to you that it's not much different. But the average American eats, well, listen, to tell you this story, like, you know, have you ever had the experience where you like tell your wife something and she's like, no. But then when she hears it from somebody else, she's like, oh, right? So I'm talking to my wife.
Every single day. All around COVID at the morning, I get up and have a little bit of a theory and a hypothesis about what's going to happen next. And she goes, nah, that's nonsense. And then I'm normally right. And then she goes, oh, yeah, a friend will tell her, Lynn will tell her. And I go, oh, really?
Yeah, now it's fascinating. Well, I was doing a bunch of research for WildFit, and you know, this is some years ago now. And it turned out, I read 2 fascinating studies, and one of them indicated that being obese, which is not, like, you're talking 2 stone on a person my size, like you're 30 pounds or something, it's not a big number. But being obese is 7 times more dangerous than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, statistically. I shared this with her. She's like, no, it can't, no. If it was, it would be on the cover of every newspaper in the world. And I'm like, no, but look, okay. And then I go, and I also read that the average American eats 154 pounds, which is what, 10 stone of sugar a year. And she's like, no. So no kidding. I'm in London, funny enough, speaking at an event, and I'm about to go on stage right after President Bill Clinton. And so he's on the stage, and this woman asks him, she's like, Mr. President, what do you think the most dangerous things are that are happening in society at the moment? He goes, well, average Americans eat 154 pounds of sugar a year. And my wife's like, oh my God, did you hear that? And he's like, you know, obesity is 7 times more dangerous than smoking a pack of cigarettes. Did you hear that? Now that Bill said, you know.
Yeah, no, fascinating. And of course, that's the sugar that we know about. That's the sugar that says sugar. I'm just trying to find a photograph to share with you, because last May I did a speech at the Public Health Collaboration, and the message wasn't even getting through to the doctors about the hidden sugar in pasta, rice and potatoes and everything. So on stage, I made 2 glass coffins. And I put my son in one coffin, my dad in the other coffin. I'm just trying to see if I can find a photograph for you. Yeah, here we go. So I'll share it with you and everybody afterwards. But I literally put my dad into a glass coffin, my son into a glass coffin. And then I started to ask them, and it was they had no idea what I was going to do. And I started to ask them about what they have for lunch, Dad, and you're diabetic type 2, injecting yourself. And we started talking about Subway, and I got all the data there. And every time they mentioned something they're turning to sugar, I poured a bucket of sugar over the top of them till the coffin was full. And with my dad, who's diabetic type 2, eating the things that his doctor still recommends, because I think in moderation, according to his doctor, he's probably diabetic himself as well. And my dad, literally within 2 months, I'd filled the coffin. I mean, just go figure. Just go figure.
One of our expressions at WildFit, we have a number of sort of internal tribe expressions, and one of them is everything in moderation includes moderate health.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Yeah, and there's a doctor here we had on the show 2 days ago. He said, if you're diabetic, why would you moderately kill yourself? If you know biscuits turning to sugar in your body, well, why would you moderately kill yourself? It's just, It's insane. So the question today, is the food industry lying to us? Well, they were certainly lying about sugar. I wonder if the word is lying or misleading. Jack, put the photo up of what I shot this morning. So here's a pack of sweets from my lovely M&S. M&S, if you remember, was like the top end, the pinnacle of food in the UK, family, traditional values and everything. And I shot a photograph of some of the I bought yesterday. It's a pack of sweets aimed obviously at children and parents, but across the top it says, contains real fruit juice. But it's the sugariest. Have you found the photograph, Jack? He's just getting it right now. Look at this. Look at this. Veggie. First of all, it's got veggie on it, as if veggie's the most important thing. Veggie Colin, the caterpillar. So they're trying to make it personal. Contains real sugar. Contains fruit juice. I mean, just look at that for a second. Does that make you angry at all? Because it makes me angry.
Well, I imagine there's more caterpillar juice in there than real fruit juice. Just accidental caterpillars walking in.
Yeah, it's just. But on the back they tell you it's 1.5% from concentrate, but it's the headline. So mum and dad that's not educated goes, oh well, we know they're not great, but it's Peppa Pig, and little Johnny loves Peppa Pig. Oh, but at least it's going to be one of his 5 a day, and I just find it so wrong. You talked about smoking. Well, once we realised that smoking was bad for us, and once it was, it had to get to a point, didn't it, where it was so undeniable, because obviously it was glamorized 60, 70 years ago, where you had to be, it was good for you, and even had doctors saying it was good for you. But then when it was just so obvious that you couldn't get away from the fact smoking was bad for you, then they put the warnings on. But based on your Bill Clinton,
I actually think the warnings ended up being part of the strategy, frankly. The cigarette industry, first of all, I don't think they're that bad. I mean, they were taking something that was obviously bad for us and trying to manipulate us to do it. That's pretty bad, but it's not nearly as bad as, say, a food industry that's taking something that's undeniably required by us, which is food, and then making it almost impossible to get nutrition or nutritionally balanced or healthy food. So I think the food industry is much worse than the tobacco industry. But that said, there's a really fascinating story about how the tobacco industry managed to get women to smoke. And it's important to understand this story because the food industry is doing this kind of thing to us all the time. So what do? They go and hire somebody who understands crowd psychology. In fact, they hire a guy whose work became some of the framework around the Nazi agenda. And this guy really understood, crowd psychology. And so when they wanted to figure out how to get women to smoke, because at that point, women just refused to smoke. They're like, no, it's gross. It's dirty and stupid. Why would you do that? So they didn't want to do it. But then they were like, how can we get women to smoke? We've got all the men smoking. There's not, market saturation. Now we got to get the women. And so the market researchers dug in and said, well, what's going on for women right now? What's happening for them? Well, they're the suffrage movement. They want to vote. I mean, it's just ridiculous, all the stuff that's going on with women. Well, wait a minute. They want independence? Oh, okay. Well, here's the deal. Just tie cigarettes to what they want, and they won't have any control over it anymore. Mm-hmm. And so Virginia Slims and other tobacco companies, but Virginia Slims in particular came up with a fantastic campaign with this attractive woman in a pair of jeans with a man's shirt tied up in front of her with a little grease on her face. You've come a long way, baby. And all of a sudden, it was like they managed to link up cigarettes to women's liberation and the vote and all this stuff. And boom, women were smoking.
Yeah.
And they are manipulating us like that all the time. And the sugar industry is no different. They're even worse, I would argue.
Yeah, I call it this cycle. It's a cycle of they put a pretty model, male, female, whoever they're after, on the advert that looks slender, normally a sports star as well, to sell crisps. In the UK, you may remember Gary Lineker.
I know, I used to watch Gary doing that all the time. I wanted to smack him.
But it is the obesity cycle. It can't be bad because Gary Lineker obviously knows about health and nutrition. He was, played for England. He's eating crisps all the time. Can't be bad for us. So then we get fatter and fatter. And then we make, of course, those things are just all profit. There's no cost in making those things. So they make more money, which means they can do even bigger adverts and more campaigns and get some more slender looking celebs. And then we keep eating more of it because now there's more celebs eating the crisps. And therefore, it can't be the crisps that are making me fat. It must be because I don't exercise as much as Gary Lineker. But now I can't exercise anyway because I can't get off the sofa. And this happened to me. I'm not having to go at anybody. I was obese for 25 years. It's insane.
Well, it's even more insidious than that because, look, I'll offer you a theory, an idea. I don't like the phrase lifestyle disease. I don't like it. Yeah. Lifestyle disease is a very clear attempt by the food industry and the government to shift the blame for their disastrous food policies onto the consumer. Yep. To say it's your fault that you're fat. It's your fault that you're type 2 diabetes. It's your diabetic. It's your fault. It's not. It's not anybody's. Anybody who's massively overweight, a little bit overweight, somebody who's type 2 diabetic and has a lifestyle disease has a disease that is the result of a disastrous food manufacturing and food marketing and food regulation and food legislation system. That's what they have a disease of. It's not a lifestyle disease. It's a government disease and food production disease. And I think that's what we just absolutely have to get, because you see, it's actually the food industry that invented the burn the calories off with exercise idea. Because you see, as they began to realize that these surplus junk calories were causing the problem, they're like, well, holy crap, we're going to have to do two things. One, we're going to have to find 0-calorie sweeteners so people will keep buying our stuff. And secondly, we're going to have to shift the blame to the consumer. And that way, the consumer will go out and exercise really hard, and then they'll celebrate their exercising by drinking our garbage. And so they created this campaign.
Yep, that was me. Back to the thing about wives never believe you, right? My wife didn't believe me when I told her there was no such thing as jogging till the late 60s, when Ken Cooper came along and invented the word aerobics. Till the late 60s, there was no need to go jogging because we were eating better food than we eat today. My wife goes, no. And people have been jogging forever. I went, no. Hunter-gatherer sprinted, they walked. Why would they? They'd never have a need to jog anywhere. And it wasn't invented to the late 60s. And then, of course, till I show her the book, oh, yeah, well, that's kind of quite obvious, get it now. But that's the point, isn't it? We've shifted the blame. And the point is, I used to find it so difficult to exercise, you know, when I was 31% body fat. And I was,
Yeah, and that, I mean, that's the irony of it is, you know, one of my most popular videos on YouTube, I think it has 8 million views, but my publisher uses it for marketing. So I imagine it's sort of paid for views, I guess, but it's still massively popular and people write to me about it all the time. This woman wrote to me just this morning. I read it just before I came on the show with you. And she says, my relationship started with you saying, stop, don't exercise, which is how the video starts. And she goes, I was so relieved to see your video that I no longer had to push myself to exercise to try to turn my health around. I was so relieved by the idea that exercise will never make me healthy, but if I am healthy, exercise can make me healthier. Yeah. And here's one of the ways that I explain that. If you and I were sitting in London and we want to head off to Glasgow, we know we're going to be in the car for what, 5-6 hours or something like that? It's quite a long trip. What are we going to do for the car before we go on the trip? Good. Top up the fuel, check the oil, check the antifreeze, check the windshield washer, check the tires, make sure they got air in them. We're going to take care of the car's physical needs before we put those kind of demands on the car. And we need to do the same thing before we attempt to exercise. So when somebody in the current world goes out to use exercise to burn off the garbage calories they're eating, They are overcharged on crappy calories and undernourished on major nutrients. And so their machine is not working. And then they go push themselves in the gym or on the running track or what have you, and wonder why they have cartilage degradation and injury. And they wonder why their muscles won't grow. And they wonder why it's not working. Well, it's not working because you have to put the right things in order to use your body at a peak experience. Mm-hmm. Exercise is a very important part of being healthy. It is. But it is not the first thing to do. The first thing to do is eat the right stuff. The second thing to do is stop eating the wrong stuff. Then we can talk about exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. So where does this all change? Does it change with consumer power? In other words, we've got to educate everybody to make the right food decisions. Does it change? Will we ever, as a small group of I don't know, problem makers, will we ever get the big food conglomerates, of which there's only about 10 of them, but they're so powerful. You know, we're not taking on a small organization here. You know, virtually everything you see in the supermarket is just from 10 big brands. So I guess we'll never be able to get them to change their ways. Does it mean we have to get the education?
We really
out there?
can.
Yeah,
we can, but we have to look at it like this. First of all, the dairy management company, another lobbyist, right? Their annual budget, when I was researching dairy products 15 years ago, their annual budget at that stage, they were managed by a guy named Paul Rovey at the time, if I remember correctly. And their budget at that stage was $165 million a year, lobbying. This is not marketing. This is not advertising on the television. That's a whole different budget. This is money being spent specifically to influence educators and legislators in order to increase the demand for dairy products. That's right out of their manifesto. Wow. Now, as long as you and I don't have a spare $165 million, it's going to be very difficult for us to compete with them at the regulatory level. It's going to be very difficult for us to compete with them at the legislative level because they are buying politicians' golf clubs. They are buying the regulations that they need. But if we go grassroots and if we go after the actual common person, and we are successful at changing their behavior. That's the tough part, because we are competing against millions of dollars of psychological research, manipulative ad campaigns. We're competing against all that. But if we can do it, what happens is people start changing their buying patterns. And as people change their buying patterns, the food manufacturers have to step up. And I have some great examples. One I'll share is this client of ours. She decided that she wanted to stop eating sugar as a result of doing our program. Now, we're not against sugar as a food in total. We're just against it being eaten the way it is by most people right now. So she decided to give up sugar in certain capacities. And one was she no longer wanted her sausages made with syrup. And she was shocked to find out they were being made with syrup to begin with. So she went to her local butcher and said, "Can I have some sausages without syrup, please?" And they're like, "Well, that'll have to be a custom order." "Okay, I'll wait." They said it'll be a week. So a week later, she gets her sausages without the syrup, and you know what? They tasted just fine. And so she put in a regular standing order, and that was that. About 4 or 5 months into this situation, she stops in to pick her regular standard order, and the guy just takes sausages right out of the cabinet and hands them to her. And she goes, no, I have a custom order. And he goes, "No, you don't anymore." Because another client, also having done WildFit and told them the name, had also started putting a request in for zero syrup sausages. By the way, syrup in sausages? In any event, they then decided that they've now had 2 clients asking this question. And so they decided to taste the sausages that they were making as custom orders. And you know what they found out? They tasted fantabulous without the syrup. So they go, "Why is it we're adding syrup?" "Well, we're adding syrup because our dad did it." So they asked her dad, "Why are we adding syrup?" "I don't know. Granddad did it." You know, like they were just passing on this ridiculous notion that some sugar salesman had convinced their grandfather of whatever years ago. And so they had completely removed syrup from their manufacturing process. No more need for a custom order. We can do this. We can create the change. We can be the change that we want to see in the food industry.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good point, isn't it? If we could get more people, maybe just pick on a couple of food types to really go in, like your sausage story, and reveal the amount of sugars in there and the harm that it's doing. And I've been doing it with Subway, and they're probably going to sue me at some point, but a Subway, a 12-inch Subway, just the bread in the UK the actual bread has the sugar equivalent of glucose effect as 15 teaspoons full of sugar. That's 60 grams. The actual bread itself turns into 60 grams, which is not a problem for my young son Jack, who's doing the program today, who's 18 years old, doing loads of exercise, loads of sport. Not a problem. But my diabetic dad, could come down on his insulin if he didn't keep eating the Subway. But people just need to know this stuff.
Well, and I would argue, you can say it's not a problem for your son. I would argue against that. I'd say it's absolutely a problem for your son. It's just not a problem today, and that's the problem.
Good point.
The problem is the consequences are pushed off, and so because the consequences are pushed off, he's like, well, it's yummy and convenient, so I'm going to do that. But you know what? You know that if he does it on a regular basis, that he's the one who's going to be sitting in a doctor's office when he turns 42 years old, and his doctor's going to say, sorry, you're diabetic now. You're going to need to have insulin injections or metformin. And the sad reality of that is that this is how people handle a diabetes diagnosis. This is how they handle it. They go, oh, okay, so I have to take insulin now? See, that's because the doctor says to them, oh, you're diabetic now. And that's the extent of the conversation.
Yeah.
What the doctor should be saying is, dude, I got some terrible news for you. You're type 2 diabetic, which means you're probably going to lose your eyesight before you're 65 years old. There's a good chance you're going to lose one of your arms or legs. You're going to have major circulatory problems. It's definitely going to cut your life short from what it could have been. And more than that, the last 20 years of your life are going to be unbelievably difficult compared to the way it would have been. And on top of that, you're going to burden the NHS by over 1,000 pounds a month in medication. And then the patient should be going, oh, is there anything I can do about this? And then the doctor should say, oh, yeah, you don't have to do any of this. You just got to change your relationship with food.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. So true. My dad, his doctor, and again, it's a shame. I'm not having to go to the NHS because they're absolutely amazing, but they don't learn about nutrition in med school at all. Zero.
That's not the fault of the NHS. That's the fault of the Rockefellers and the Carnegies that manipulated the medical educational structure of the world in order to propagate their investments in pharmaceutical companies. Like it is insane that a doctor can go to school. I mean, I've asked this question of doctors for 20 years now. After I had my health recovery, I went to one of my doctors and said, I was 21 years old and I looked about 12, and I go, you can imagine what it would have been like for a doctor to face me looking 12 going, hey, how long did you go to medical school? He's like, 6 years. And how much of that time did you spend studying food? None. And you know what was crazy? He was more surprised by the answer than me because he'd never asked the question before. It's not his fault. It's not. And by the way, doctors aren't like that anymore. Doctors now get it. In fact, we have many, many certified wild fit coaches that are doctors. I don't know if I told you guys last time about my co-author of the post-diabetic book. Did I tell you his story? It's a fascinating story. You're going to love it. He's a medical doctor, right? He owns 3 clinics in Southern California, and he's 40 pounds overweight, hypertensive, type 2 diabetic, and on 5 medications. He stops off at the Starbucks, because his 5 medications aren't enough to keep him awake. So he buys himself a big coffee to keep himself awake on the way to work. He's driving down the freeway in Los Angeles. Despite having bought the coffee, falls asleep at the wheel, has a horrible car accident. Luckily, nobody's injured, but holy crap, what happened? And so 3 days later, he's in a rental car because his car is totaled, stopped off at Starbucks to get himself a coffee to keep himself awake on the way back to the clinic, falls asleep and drifts off into the HOV lane and has another horrible car accident. Luckily, nobody's hurt. But at this point, he's thinking to himself, what business do I have being a doctor? What business do I have being a doctor? And that night, he goes home, and weirdly, one of my videos catches attention. He does one of our master classes and ends up going through our program. 3 months later, he's lost 40 pounds. He's no longer hypertensive. He's no longer type 2 diabetic. He is what we now refer to as a post-diabetic. And he is sneaking patients of his through our platform because he's removed his medications and he wants to get them off their medications. His old metric was, how many medications am I prescribing? Now his metric is, how many am I unprescribing? The medical industry is changing. The problems were never about the doctors. It was about the pharmaceutical industry and their influence on education.
Yeah, it's probably the same in the States. In the UK, they spend more on marketing to doctors and GP surgeries than they do marketing to the public. So you can just understand why doctors are confused. And a beautiful doctor we had on the other day, Dr. David Unwin, he says, and he's been a doctor for so many years, And he said, I used to prescribe. He said, my favorite thing now, when I go home and I pat myself on the back, is de-prescribing, getting people off medication by putting them on lifestyle changes.
I had a woman write to me 4 days ago, and she wrote me the most heartfelt letter. And she says, 4 or 5 days ago, and she says, I had thyroid cancer 30 years ago, and I had to have all the different like chemotherapy stuff, and it caused permanent damage to her esophagus. It caused some kind of polyp or growth that kind of comes up, and she has to go to the hospital, and she has to have her esophagus stretched. I just want you to imagine what that even means. And the reason she was writing to me is that with COVID-19 and all the clinics shut down, she was deeply concerned that she wouldn't be able to get her stretching procedure done. And by the way, the doctors made it very clear to her she'd need to have this procedure for the rest of her life, and she would absolutely end up on a feeding tube when they could no longer stretch it for her. She changed her relationship with food. She changed her relationship with food. And then all of a sudden she realized she was like 2 weeks late for her esophageal stretching program because she could swallow just fine. I believe very firmly that just about every injury or disease is significantly easier to heal from if you get your relationship with food right. The first thing we should do is get the food right. And then if that doesn't sort it out, then let's go get the medical intervention.
Yeah, no, it's just great advice. And it's back to what you were saying earlier on, when somebody walks in to the surgery, every doctor first, before saying metformin or insulin or any other medication, the very first thing is, let's have one crack at changing your life. Do all the things you said about you could lose a limb, your eyesight, massive increase of heart disease, and those won't go away just to give you medication, but they're going to really come down in terms of likelihood if you get your relationship, as you say, with food right. It'd be great if, and maybe one day we'll get to that point where
there are doctors that are doing that now. And it's funny when we talk to our book marketing team about like, what's our target audience for this book? And it's called Post-Diabetes, or it's called Post-Diabetes, a 9-week strategy for reversing type 2 and pre-diabetes. And they asked us, who's the target audience for the book? And we're like, well, passively, the target audience is people who are pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic, and we want to help them. But actively, our target audience is doctors. We want it in their offices. We want it sitting in their waiting room. We want them to hand it out instead of metformin, hand it out instead of prescription. We want people to walk in and they look at their A1C measurement and go, oh my gosh, you're pre-diabetic. This is the book you need to be reading, because it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, that's great. And is that book out yet? Or
no, it's in editing. I'm editing every day at the moment. It's written. We've done that bit. Now it's in the editing process. And we've made the decision not to go with the standard publisher because we were, unfortunately, when COVID-19 came out, our priorities shifted. And what happened is, when we were going to go we had an agent lined up in New York and we were going to go that direction, but we were getting the fastest number we could get in terms of getting published was 14 months. Wow. And what we now know with COVID-19 is that diabetes is one of the major risk factors. I mean, it's so funny, like they're all out there talking about this we got to get a vaccine. Listen, vaccines, there are certain diseases where, yeah, you know what, get the vaccine. I don't want to, but this disease doesn't require a vaccine. This disease is like, it's very clear that 90% of the people that are seriously hospitalized, that succumb to the disease, that have mortality, 90% of them have a, quote, lifestyle disease. Again, a food industry disease. They are obese, or they are type 2 diabetic, or they've got metabolic syndrome of some kind. They have hypertension or autoimmune disease. And that's what's going on. And so here's the deal. If that's true, well, hang on now. A good vaccine, look, we can get into the argument about vaccines another time, but a good vaccine is considered good when it's 90 to 95% effective. Well, hold on a second now. The numbers demonstrate that if people didn't eat the way they eat, then 90% reduction in what's going on. That's as effective as a vaccine. But we can't mandate what people eat, can we? We can't mandate what people put in their bodies unless, of course, it comes in a syringe, in which case maybe then we can mandate it. No. Change your relationship with food. Yeah. Take the vaccine if you want, but even more effective than that is with regard to this virus, change your relationship with food.
Yeah, absolutely right. In fact, a doctor came out and said on the BBC yesterday, he said that if you haven't got any of those conditions, he said it's as the danger, the risk for you of it, of hospitalized, you could get it, but of it being serious at all, the risk is the same risk as if you drove from work in Swindon to London and back each day. It's an equal risk to 180 miles of driving if you haven't got one of these conditions. So the other thing, so get your relationship with food right, eat real food, reverse your diabetes, lose some weight, eat real food. In fact, the moment we're saying stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives, it should be eat real food, protect the NHS, save lives.
Yeah, I'm so with you. And by the way, I saw this early, 7 or maybe 8 weeks ago now, when this all was blown up over the world. I was listening to all this advice about social distancing and wash your hands. I'm like, yep, good stuff. But why is nobody talking about health? Like nobody, like nobody on Twitter, no doctors, nobody's talking about it. And so I made a video and I went out and I said, guys, and I created this hashtag, last line of defense. Yes, do the social distancing. Yes, you wash your hands, don't touch your face, wear a mask, whatever, do that stuff. But your last line of defense is your own health and your own immune system. And that video has gone out. It's got over 1 million views around the world. But you know what's crazy? In the first 2 weeks it went out, I was attacked by mostly medical professionals, many times doctors, and largely nutritionalists. And they attacked me. They said, you're just a shill. You're just trying to sell your programs. By the way, I never once mentioned my company in the video. I never once mentioned any programs they could do. It was a public service announcement. Think about it. It was 1 million views. It would have been good for me to mention my company, but that wasn't on my mind. What was on my mind is that if you really want to protect it, and so all these people are attacking me. That's not how viruses work. That's not blah, 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 these like keyboard junkies. And then guess what? Over the next couple of weeks, it's like, hang on, the news out of Italy says you might need to be obese to die from this. And the news out of New York is saying, and now of course, it's absolutely clear. Your health is the most significant influence on how this disease treats you.
Do you think coming back out of COVID, when we come out the other side, we'll have a short memory and people will go back to eating the same crap they used to? Or do you think this may actually have a sort of silver lining in the sense that we now realize that being overweight, obese, high blood pressure, is related to the food that we eat, or are people just not joining those dots yet?
Yes, to both. I think it's going to be both. I think there are some people right now that are forgetting something incredibly important. They believe that the lockdown is summer camp, when I would suggest to them that the lockdown should be boot camp. You see, because life post-pandemic, post-lockdown is going to be different than anything we've ever seen before. It's not going to go back to the way it was. There are entire industries that are going to be bankrupted and destroyed. The economy is going to take years to recover, and we're going to need to be smarter, healthier, faster, more resourceful than ever before. It's going to be incredibly Darwinian out there. So we should be using the lockdown to improve our health, improve our skills, improve our education. We should be using it. But most people, at least many people, are sitting at home eating emotional foods and giving their time to Netflix and HBO and the BBC. They're using it like a relaxation period. And here's one of the problems with that. We know this from brain plasticity neurology, that anything you do consistently on a daily basis for 15 to 21 days, it has the incredible risk of becoming a habit. And so there are people right now that are in habit acquiring mode, and they don't even know they're doing it. So they're eating bad stuff because what the hell, it's the lockdown. Of course, it's the lockdown. We can eat it right now. I mean, in Belgium, the government's telling people to eat more French fries. I'm sorry, but first of all, go and look.
Is that true? Is that true?
I saw it. I thought it was fake news. Look, no.
My son's going. My son says, yeah, that's right, Dad. That's unbelievable.
And by the way, at the risk of being accused of fat shaming, I'm sorry, but go look at a picture of the health minister of Belgium. I'm sorry, but this is not fat shaming. This is a very serious question. They have Bernie Madoff as their finance director. They may as well. And so, we're in a place right now where there's very confusing information about what needs to happen. And it doesn't have to be confusing at all. We need to be healthy for this, and we can use the lockdown to get healthier. But most people are having bad habits during the lockdown because it's like a vacation. And they don't realize that at the end of it, it's going to be very difficult to break the neurological habits that they're creating. And so people shouldn't wait till the end of the lockdown to get things right. They shouldn't treat it like that it's like, oh, it's December leading up to January 1st and I'm going to have my post-lockdown resolutions. They should be doing it now.
Yeah. And I guess it falls into both camps. Where we live, we're on top of the hill and there's a park in front. And I'm definitely seeing more people out jogging, but we're seeing the ones that are out. You're right, they probably fall into two camps. There's probably some people that are getting healthier and setting habits over the 21 days of more exercise. A lot of people we've been encouraging to use that lockdown to read about food, try and cook something new for the first time, look at ingredients, take your time to research food and so on. But you're right, there will be the other camp that are taking it like an extended holiday. And will do their normal January resolution maybe when they come out the other side of it. But then the new habits are set in and it might just get really, really worse. So
I think that the one thing that's going to be great is that the data that's coming out and that will continue to come out and that will be analyzed will highlight beyond any reasonable doubt how dangerous the food industry is. We will see that COVID-19 was a product of the food industry. Don't hear me wrong. Don't quote me wrong. Somebody's going to take that little clip and go, look, Eric says the food industry invented coronavirus. No. A bat did it, or the Chinese lab, or David Icke or whatever, and the reptiles that he thinks run the world. I don't care how it got created. I happen to believe that it was a natural creation, but that's not the point here. The point is, however it was created, the only reason it's managed to get a foothold in our society is because our society is sick. I would suggest to you that if coronavirus escaped its cave or lab or wherever it's from in the 1960s, you wouldn't even know it happened because there wasn't enough obesity, hypertension, autoimmune disease. There just wasn't enough of that for the disease to even be dangerous for us. We wouldn't even know.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. In fact, my previous book before Fat and Furious was called Britain is Sick. And you look at the list of illnesses, it's ridiculous. 1 in 2 people in the UK will be diagnosed with cancer, according to cancer research. 25% suffer a mental illness. Heart disease is still the biggest killer in men. Diabetes rates have doubled in 20 years, and obesity is about to bankrupt the NHS. That was 2 years ago. And the reality is every single one of those conditions, in part, food plays with it, and in part, it's subconsciously happened as our brains have been hacked by the advertising world. And therefore, you're absolutely right. We don't know what caused COVID, but the thing that's made it a real problem can relate back to food.
Yeah, for me, there's no question about that. And one thing that's really fascinating about those statistics you're reading out is that 100 years ago, cancer and heart disease were not even in the top 10. They weren't even in the top 10. And now they occupy cancer, heart disease, and respiratory disease are in the top 3. Iatrogenic death is in the top 5, which means medical error. Well, wait a minute now. I'm not saying that the medical industry is so terrible. I'm just saying that most of the people that are in there being subjected to a medical error were probably in there because they had heart disease or cancer or something. And so we're at a place where diseases occupy 90% of death that weren't even in the top 10 killers 100 years ago.
Yeah, me and you need to write a book together because in my first book, it says deaths 100 years ago were pneumonia, tuberculosis, diarrhea, polio, measles, scarlet fever, and things like that. Today, heart disease didn't come anywhere, nowhere. And that man alive in 1870 in the UK when we had a surplus, we had a couple of good years with farming, and even the sort of the lower, I hate using words like that, but everybody in society for about 3 or 4 years in the 1870s had access to real food. We had overproduction, everything. And the man then lived longer than the male today, even with all those diseases. And you're right back to the very beginning when you talked about the elephant. The elephant, when fed the right food that it was used to feeding, living then in the circus where they can protect them from animals and attacks and other things, in theory should live longer. We should all be living to 100 plus at the moment with the NHS in the UK. We should be, because we've got rid of most of the diseases. surely our age.
And we not only have we gotten rid of the diseases, but we've gotten rid of everything else. I mean, the odds of you dying from an accident or anything are so different than even 100 years ago. Like, we live in the safest times in the history of ever. Yeah. And so, yeah, if we were to optimize our bodies according to our proper hydration, nutritional requirements and movement requirements and all that kind of stuff, and then combine that with the unbelievable safety of our current society, yeah, like we are now fully capable of living to our full genetic potential and not needing to be under medication and surgery for the last 20 years of that.
Yeah. And isn't it frightening that, there's lots of statistics saying that my children's generation will probably live 10 years shorter than my generation, which is just, we can't accept.
That's what they're saying. They're saying the same thing in the US, that we are not, they're not, okay, first of all, life expectancy has been lowering officially, not even like, I know the calculation you're doing. So officially people live longer now than they did when you're talking about. But if you factor for childhood disease and you take that out, you're right. If somebody makes it to 13, they were living longer at that stage. But officially, even the life expectancy number is coming down. And now they're even predicting that we're birthing a generation of children now that their parents will likely outlive.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
And sad.
Yeah. So we think we can change it by consumer behavior, because we can't take the lobbyists full on because they've got so much money. You talked about the sausage storage, which I thought was fascinating. So give us, we've got about 5 minutes, give us some food choices that we should all be making to try and avoid some of these diseases. And then the more we can spread that word about Eric's food choices, maybe we'll start voting with our feet.
Well, I think that the food choices, I am always reluctant to answer that question, because the fact is most people will hear the rules, they won't follow them, then it's really fascinating. This is how a diet fails you. You're given rules, here they are, don't eat this, eat that. Then you rebel against those rules at some point in the diet, and you produce serotonin and dopamine because you feel like a rebel, which makes you feel good. You then eat the junk food and anchor it to the serotonin and dopamine, perpetuating the problem. And in the meantime, your self-esteem has taken a hit because you broke the rules. And so now your self-control has gone further down. That people don't fail diets, diets fail people. That's how they do it. That said, I want to suggest this. Start reading the labels wherever you go. Notice that sugar is in the top 3 ingredients of a great many things that you wouldn't even know had sugar in them. Next time you're in Sainsbury's, or you're sitting in the grocery store, and you're in Waitrose, and you pick up a jar of tomato sauce and you look and you see sugar's number 2 on the ingredient, I say smash it on the floor. Now, I'm kidding. I'm not saying you should really smash it on the floor. Go ahead, smash it on the floor. But here's the thing. If you smash it on the damn floor, and if you do that, they'll stop putting it on the shelf. But the real reason I said that to you is to demonstrate one other thing to you, and it's called a psychological trigger. Because there's a very good chance that the next time you're in Waitrose and you pick up that jar, the next time you're in Sainsbury's and you pick up that jar and you look and you see sugar, you're going to have this mental image of me going, smash it on the floor, smash it on the floor. And that is going to be a mental trigger that's going to give you a moment of consciousness to put that thing back on the shelf.
Yeah.
And that's where we really have to help people. We have to help them with the psychological piece. People know, eat more good quality, high quality, ethically raised proteins. Eat a wide variety of seasonally available fruits and vegetables. They know all this. But they also know, cut down your refined sugar intake, cut down your processed carb intake, cut down your gross fat intake, the trans fats. They know that too. But willpower doesn't work. And what we have to do is work on helping people with their psychology. If people will ultimately, what they will ultimately do is do what they want. If we're going to help them, we have to change what they want. Just
give me that psychology again, because I think that's why in my youth I smoked. I think that's why quite often, because you knew it was bad.
I'll tell you why.
Give me that psychology again. Why do I still like a glass of whiskey when I know that if one or two red wines is all right, but there's absolutely no benefit of a whiskey. So why do I still do that? Here's the question I've got for you. When do you start to feel better? You're not feeling great. You want to have the glass of whiskey. When do you start feeling better? I think when you've made that decision, you're going to break the rules.
That's right. The minute you go, I'm having a whiskey, you start producing serotonin and dopamine. You start feeling good. Now listen, I don't know what experimentations you might have done as a child, but you know, there's certain drugs that if you have them, they make food taste yummy. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but serotonin and dopamine are like that. So you have some rebellion. You go, I'm going to have the whiskey. You produce serotonin and dopamine. Then you drink the whiskey. The whiskey tastes better than it really does because you're high on your own drugs. And in a Pavlovian dog sense, you link the whiskey to the good feelings you're having when the whiskey had nothing to do with the good feelings. The entire food industry and the diet industry is built on that relationship.
Yeah, that's fascinating because, you know, occasionally I'll do a day like this. We do some recordings, we do some lectures, we see some people that we're helping. So health all day. All we're even talking about is health all day. I've done great. I've done my fasting. I've had my steak. I've had nothing else. It's absolutely brilliant. 10 o'clock at night. I've been great all day. And I go, I'm going to have a whiskey. It's just like, how stupid, just spoilt the whole day of being, you know, completely primal. So
I'll tell you what, come and do, seriously, give me 90 days and I'll fix that for you.
Yeah.
I mean it. You see, you're better than, your willpower is better than most because you've got incredible leverage. You've got incredible ideas. But the trouble is that you still have old linkages. There's something that whiskey means to you. There's some linkage that you haven't yet unlocked and broken. And so you give up your freedom to whiskey from time to time. By the way, I'm not suggesting you should never have whiskey again. But anytime you're having it and wish you weren't, you got to think about what that means. It means you're not free.
Yeah, that's great advice. Really, really good advice. Tell us how everybody gets in touch with you while we wait for your new book to come out, and how does everybody get on your program? Because while you did get 1 million viewers on your public announcement, this one isn't. So this one, feel free to plug all your courses.
Well, I think that the very best thing they can do is go to getwildfit.com. And here's the deal. We have a 14-day reset. And it's actually not even on the website because it's something we really like. We offer particular target audiences. But if you write to us through the help desk on there, I will make sure you guys get access to it. It's a 14-day program. It's only, I think, $27 or what is that, 4 pounds? I don't know. I'm kidding.
I wish at the moment.
You know, it's like, and honestly, give me that 14 days and your relationship with food will never be the same again. And that will form the basis of no longer having to use willpower to change. In the meantime, hey guys, come find me on Instagram. I answer people's questions myself every day. I spend about an hour just going through and answering people's questions. And come find me on Instagram. My name @Eric Edmeades, and let's make some real change to the psychology. I want to suggest to you, every single time somebody gives you a set of rules, and every single time you break those rules, you hurt your self-esteem a little. And you make it even less likely that you'll stick with any diet. Let me help you build the food self-esteem and change your relationship with food, and then everything will be different.
Brilliant. And what sort of people are getting the best results? Are we mainly talking about people that are overweight or diabetics? Nope. Or?
No, I hate to say it, in marketing, it would be really good if I just marketed at a particular niche group. But here's the thing. If you are a member, there's a very elite club. If you're a member of this club, then your entire life can be transformed by improving your relationship with food. The club is called Sapiens. And I don't care if people want to gain weight or lose weight, but I can tell you anecdotally, these are the kind of recoveries we hear about every single day. By the way, go to our Facebook page. You'll see, like, think about this. As a diet, it's not easy to get good ratings on consumer reviews because they fail. We have a 4.9 star rating on Facebook with 300 plus reviews or what have you. We don't even solicit them. It's just like, that's just clients. We have over 300 documented stories that our clients have submitted. We have many, many more that are like casually written to us, but we're talking about ones that have been vetted and documented that we use in, to show people what's going on. And here's what we're talking about: weight loss, weight gain, improved sex drive and fertility, better sleep, better skin, better hair. And it's not because there's any miracle thing. We won't make you buy special food. We won't sell you supplements. All we're going to do is do the core foundation, and that is help you get to a place where you don't have to use willpower to eat the right things and to avoid the wrong things. And then it will be easy for you.
Brilliant. Sounds really, really good, Eric. Thanks for coming on. It's always fascinating talking with you. And really appreciated with that time difference. at 5 o'clock. But it does mean now, you know, it's only, what is it? It's 6 o'clock in the morning. You could probably go kite surfing right now, unless the wind's not up.
No, our wind doesn't usually start till about 1. But the fact is, I was editing my book until about 2 in the morning. So I've had about an hour's sleep. I'm going back now. I'm gonna resume the sleep cycle.
Well, you deserve it, my friend. It's been absolutely a pleasure talking with you. Oh, I tell you what, I better just check, because there's probably going to be a load of questions as well. No, today they're all just giving us comments, agreeing on what you've been saying, agreeing about not waiting for the vaccination. Steve and Eric, I have, oh no, here we got one from Susan. Steve and Eric, I have yo-yo dieted for years. Now you are giving me the science behind all this. I will never be obese again. It's such a blessing. You are both inspirational. Thank you. That was from Susan. Isn't that lovely? Marvel says, 15 years ago, I was monitored for 3 years for high blood pressure in hospital. Forced to have drugs or I'll have a stroke. I refused hospital. I closed my file. I started eating salads and healthy, and I'm all perfect to date. It's just, some people are just brilliant. They stand up, and because that is the problem, isn't it? You know, it's for the governments and the people that raise taxes. It's brilliant. You know, let people make really cheap food, massively profitable, pay a load of tax, but they get really sick. Oh, we'll have a big pharmaceutical industry, another hugely profitable industry, to sell drugs and pay more taxes.
But hold on. You're using Enron accounting. It's incredibly bad for the government, because who's paying for all the drugs from the pharmaceutical companies? National health care. The food industry is bankrupting the health system. If you want to fix the NHS, fix the food system. The problem is that, yeah, the food industry is making a lot of money. And in order to increase their profitability, they're driving the nutritional availability of food down and increasing the addictiveness of it. They're trying to remove your freedom. They're trying to remove your choice. They're profitable. Now that's stimulating a whole lot of money. And just think about diabetes alone. In America, we go from 0 to 20 million young diabetics. Never mind the fact that there are 100 million people dealing with diabetes in America, but just those 20 million that weren't there 40 years ago at all. They spend $1,000 a month on medication, never mind their doctor's visits, that kind of stuff. You're talking about $20 billion a year. Who's paying for that? Medical insurance. And in your case, it means the government, because you've got the NHS. So it's not a good thing for the government at all. The problem is the government is elected on 4-year cycles, so they don't really care about the impact 20 years out.
True. You don't want to
Incidentally, my team just wrote to me and they said that they've created a URL where people can get the 14-day reset. It's getwildfit.com/reset. They can go get it right away.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. We'll just put that up. Jack, did you hear that? Jack's got that. He's going to put that up straight
Thank you, Jack.
away. It's very sad the majority of people don't want to know about low-carb diets and don't ever want to try to reduce the carbs, especially bread and spuds, says Sheila.
Sheila, they're addicted. You can't blame them. It's not their fault. The food industry did this to them, and all we can do is hold the space for them to come out of it eventually and try to stimulate their curiosity. But it isn't their fault. These things are addictive. They're actually addictive. They're more addictive, I would argue, than cigarettes everywhere. Because, by the way, when you quit smoking, did you vomit? Did you get a headache? Did you have any withdrawal? No. Yeah. You suffered the exact same withdrawal symptoms that a child suffers when they quit sucking their thumb, because I would put to you, cigarettes aren't even addictive. What you're addicted to when you smoke is the emotional habit of it, and one more thing, deep breathing that communicates to your cells that you're incredibly safe. So somebody goes outside and goes, that's what made them feel good, not the cigarette. And by the way, you mentioned this earlier, they started putting warnings on the package. Think about this. People suffer no actual physical withdrawal symptoms when they quit smoking. Not like heroin, caffeine, alcohol. Those trigger physical reactions in the body. When they quit smoking, what do? They get fidgety. There's no, wasn't it a masterstroke? Wasn't it a total masterstroke to get this message put on the box? Cigarettes are addictive.
Yeah.
It's a placebo impact.
Yeah.
It gave everybody the reason to not be able to quit.
Yeah.
Brilliant marketing move.
Yeah. And I'd never thought about it like that before. you're almost then taking the blame, again, like the food, isn't it? You're taking the blame. Oh my goodness gracious me. Hi Steve, great show. If you want to live longer, please interview Aubrey de Grey. I don't know who Aubrey de Grey is, but I will find out. Wonderful show. I love Eric, says Jenny. You've got some, and Gemma says the same. You've got some big fans over here. Thank you for your time today, mate. Have a lovely, lovely day. And I hope the wind comes out this afternoon so you can get out there and do some kite surfing. And where you're living at the moment, my son and I, in fact, my entire family have never been to Dominican Republic. We want to come. There's some gemstones found in the south called Larimar, which we love that gemstone.
Larimar all over the place.
Yeah, it's great for that stone. We also like kite surfing, but we're rubbish at it. So we might come and tap you up for a little lesson or two.
Absolutely, we'll make it happen.
Cheers, Eric. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you,
Again for having me.
You're more than welcome. Eric, he was fantastic, wasn't he? What a brilliant, brilliant guy. He's offered that 14-day trial for us all. I'm going to sign up for that and have a little go and see what we can always be learning. That's what I love about life. Life is all one big lesson, one big learning curve. Thank you for your questions today. We are back tomorrow, and tomorrow we have Jerome on, and Jerome Byrne was the co-author of The Hybrid Diet. Brilliant, brilliant book that's written also by Patrick Holford, who we've had on several times before. So we're going to find out tomorrow what Patrick and Jerome meant by the hybrid diet. Until tomorrow, stay safe. And as Eric says, if you're going to create any new habits, let's try and make them healthy ones.